If you're familiar with the channel by now, you know that this video is a recap of the video series that I did on this specific build. On the channel there is a multi-part series on the build going a lot more in-depth and detail on all the specific steps I took to build this kit, along with a full voiceover on every video. In this video I'm just going to recap those videos, combine them together, cut a couple parts out that weren't as interesting, and just make a nice smooth video. So I hope you enjoyed this video itself. If you have any questions, feel free to check out the comment section below and let me know. Also, in the description underneath the video there will be a lot of links to the specific products that I used, so check those out as well. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any feedback, please let me know. To start off the build itself, I always take out the body first to paint that and of course finish it off with some clear coat, and that I have enough time to set that aside to properly cure, so in the meantime I can move on to the interior and chassis components. Now in this case I cut off the rear bumper from the sprues and started completing the body itself by gluing it on and also fixing some of the panel gaps and panel alignment. With that completed, I could move on to the mold lines. I first mark them off with a permanent marker to show me where they are and also act as a guide coat. So when I start sanding, I remove the black marker. I also remove the mold line itself. The panel lines on this body were actually pretty good, but it doesn't hurt to just go over them a couple times, make them a little bit deeper and pronounced. For the primer and paint to properly stick to the body itself, I always sand it down with a 600 grit, remove the dust, and then move it into the spray booth. This time I'm using Streetblisters' new paint series, starting it off with the primer, then applying some color, adding some decals, and finishing it off with a high gloss clear. After applying multiple coats of the yellow, it was fully covered and I could set it aside to cure for a couple of hours before I moved on to applying the decals. Now in this case I decided to add the carbon exterior and interior package to this entire build, so I had to add some decals to the side blades and also a couple other exterior components for that package to be completed. These carbon decals are from Scale Production and I will leave links in the description below. Some other decals were added from the kit itself for the emblems and some of the mesh grills as well. Once all of the decals were applied, you can let it cure overnight or just use a hairdryer to speed up the process. Once that was completed, I moved on to mixing some of the clear coat, again from Streetblisters. There will be links in the description down below, and started applying that in multiple coats. While the body was set aside to cure for a couple of days, I moved on to prepping, priming, and painting all of the interior components. Then I moved on to adding some additional decals, like I said, For the exterior, I will be using the carbon package, and I will do the same for the interior. So a couple of templates were made with some tape and markers, then the decals were carefully cut out one by one, and I started placing them. In the standard Revell kit, there is a nice pattern for some diamond stitching. Though I'm not using the standard Revell seats, I decided to use some scale production ones, so I had to alter the pattern on that decal sheet, cut them up and fit them to shape and size for these seats. Some other decals for the interior were applied as well. I personally always like to add some carpet as well, and this is done with some flocking. I lay down a really thick wet coat of clear, then apply the flocking on top of it while it's still wet, then it soaks in and acts as a glue. The interior itself is pretty much only black, so I decided to add a couple of contrasting black colors as well to just distinguish between the leather and some of the plastic components. This is done with a flat black and a superfine brush. Some silver details were added here and there as well for some of the aluminum components. With pretty much all of the details and decals now applied, I could let that cure for a bit and then start on the assembly of the interior. After finalizing the interior, I could move on to the chassis itself. A couple of the engine components could be glued together prior to painting, and then I could move on to the painting stage itself, giving every component their own color. Once all of the parts were painted, I could move on to detailing them. Firstly, I started with the carbon fiber decals on the rear diffuser and the side mirrors as well, along with some of the engine parts too. With all of the carbon fiber decals now applied, a couple of the kit decals and some additional details painted on, I could move on to giving it a nice smooth clear coat to give it a glossy look. After a couple coats of clear, those parts were set aside to cure for a couple of days, and in the meantime I could move on to adding a couple of details here and there for in the engine bay and also on the chassis itself, being careful not to touch the clear coat as that is still pretty wet. And once that was all cured, I could move on to assembly. All of the clear parts for the exterior also needed a bit of paint, so I carefully started with masking those up and then applying a couple coats of flat black before removing the masking tape. The taillights also needed to be painted with a clear red, so I applied that in multiple thin coats to get a nice smooth coverage on those as well. So prior to painting, I scribed out the panel lines to make them nice, deep, and pronounced. Now after painting they are still nicely visible, so that's a good thing, but just to highlight them a bit more and give them a bit more depth, I decided to add some Panelline accent color in them. All of the necessary exterior parts and pieces are now glued on and inside of the body, so I could move on to fitting the chassis and interior together. It's a bit of a tight squeeze here and there. Don't be afraid to bend some of the parts as they need to be bent out of the way in order to fit the other parts in. On the front section there wasn't really anything to glue or hold the body to, so I just decided to add a big fat glob of CA glue on the front and just hold it together for a bit. So the standard kit wheels didn't really cut it to my taste, so I added some wheels that I printed myself on my Elegoo Mars. These are from my friend Slowly's models. I will leave links in the description down below. And I added some Aoshima tires. Now the disc brakes and calipers from the kit were okay, but not really up to my liking. I personally really like the look of some big beefy brakes, so I printed those as well. These are on the same printer. There will be links in the description where I found the files, and on my channel there are multiple videos on 3D printing itself. These were then of course also painted and detailed out, as you can see here, and then glued in place. The main glass could now be glued in as well for on the front and rear. Now normally I'd use some Super Gold Plus. This is a super glue that is safe for clear parts, but I'm stepping away from that a little bit as the glue is really aggressive, and if you mess it up it's permanently done pretty much, and it's not really easy to fix. So I decided to test out some new glues, and I found this one from Microscale Industries. It's called their Crystal Clear, and it's really easy to work with. It looks very similar to wood glue and it works pretty much the same way, but personally I think it dries a little bit quicker, or at least has a bit more of a tacky way to attach the parts that keeps them in place a lot sooner without fully curing the glue. I also added some paint on the inside of the body for the front section where the headlight buckets mount, as when you put the clear part in, still a lot of the yellow from the body color was visible, so that needs to be painted black to blend in fully with the headlight bucket before the lenses could be glued in place. With the final wiper now glued in, this build is completed. So just to sum it up, the wheels and calipers were custom printed on a resin 3D printer. The links will be down in the description below. The body is painted with Streetblisters paint from start to finish, primer, color, and clear coat itself. And some of the carbon fiber decals are from Skill Production. On the interior side, I also added some decals as well from Skill Production, some seat belts, and also some flocking to simulate the carpet from USCP. And finally, not to forget, the main kit itself was supplied by Revell. There are more kits on the way, so feel free to check out my channel for previous builds, and of course keep in mind that there will be more builds to come.